1 second here.
Yeah.
Okay, so the idea first is we will do an ideas for us to do an icebreaker. So I know we're a lot here in this meeting, but so we get to know each other, and also it's important for me. I'm interested to learn your expectations. What do you expect the main takeaways from this presentation are? In terms of my presentation, I'm going to make a quick presentation of what the NDC partnership is, just so you understand where I'm coming from, right? Why we think that the resources that I'm going to present today and the data that I'm going to present today are relevant in the context of, global climate discussion and especially around finance. I'm going to talk about, like Ilona mentioned, finance support gaps. What are countries? How do country needs look like? Where are the gaps? Where are the opportunities? Then I'm going to present our NDC investment planning guide as a tool to help countries mobilize finance. I'm going to make also a quick presentation of two other resources that we have available at the partnership. Then I have a quick surprise for you, and then we can open the floor for Q&A. Just to set expectations from the beginning, in terms of quantification, I'm not going to present like methodologies today, but we have, the idea is that the NDC investment planning guide provides with, a step structure approach for planning investments, including quantifying and costing climate finance. But yeah, just to set the expectation in terms of what you will hear today. So, but before we start, I would like you to go to menti.com. You can use the QR code, or you can enter this code 33170512. And first, I would like to know where are you joining from. So you can just click in the country, the region where you're joining from. I'm interested to learn about that. I see already some people participating. Please let me know if you're having problems with the with Menti. I cannot see the chat, or if someone is making comments. So Ilona, if you can let me know. But I see people already entering. Okay, great. I mean, we have more than 4 people, right? I only see 4 people so far. Okay, there's more, and from every region. Do we have people from Africa joining as well? Europe? Great. I see more people clicking. Let's give 30 more seconds. We have 62 participants. Once we reach at least half, then we can move forward.
Okay, so Adrian
Yes.
Pelele says Kingdom of Eswatini. So I don't know if she's put it there, but yeah, that's where she's from.
Great. Great. So it's good. I'm surprised that we have participants from all over the world. So kudos to Yongo for the convening power. So yeah, no, I'm glad and pleased to see that. And so I think we can move to the next question that I have for you. I would like to know what your expectations are with today's presentation. It could be my presentation, but also Chavi's. What are you expected to take away? You can type ideas, words, short sentences, anything that you expect to take away today. Great, I see already some responses, insights, great, big pictures. We will get a big picture in terms of finance needs from countries and where the support is, where the gaps are, professional perspective, numbers. We're gonna get some numbers. We're gonna get some methodologies. We're not gonna delve too deep into the methodologies, but we are definitely gonna explore not the methodology, but the approach of our NDC investment planning guide. Great. Now I see a lot of movement here. It's hard to read, but great. How to solve gaps. We are proposing solutions to solve finance gaps. NDC partnership. You will learn more about the NDC partnership. Role of the UNFCCC. This is something we can discuss during our Q&A. Great. Climate financial tips, different points of view. Great. So, I mean, I think everything looks great. You can continue entering your answers. We can review them after the presentation, and we can also share this with you after the meeting. So thank you very much for that. So I'm going back to the presentation, and we will return to Menti. So keep the app open, keep it closed. So first, I mean, I don't want to take too much time talking about the NDC partnership, but I think it's important to understand what the NDC partnership does and where we're coming from, right? When presenting what I'm about to present. So in a few words, the NDC partnership is a global coalition for collective action, climate action. We have more than 200 members, including more than 150 countries, 80 institutions. The most important developing institutions from the world are part of the NDC partnership. And basically what we do is that we help countries create and deliver ambitious climate action that helps them to achieve their climate commitments under the Paris Agreement, but also some other sustainable development goals. How do we work? Well, we have a support unit that is the secretariat of the NDC partnership. And basically what we do is we are facilitators. So we get a request, a request from countries. We curate them, we socialize them with our partners they pick those, later pick those requests for support, and then they take it from there. So we facilitate, we help do this matchmaking between the available resources and the demands or the requests from countries. We have 2 work streams and work in various cross-cutting issues. So we have country engagement. Country engagement are, all the team that is working, doing this facilitation, working on the ground with countries. We have, of course, presence in all of the countries that are part of the partnership. And we have also knowledge and learning. I belong to the knowledge and learning team. And what we do is that we convene and we work on instruments, tools, to help countries and partners work together in enhancing their NDCs or in implementing or financing their NDCs. We, of course, also work on cross-cutting topics such as finance and gender and also youth inclusion and participation. Regarding youth engagement, we support our country members to meaningfully engage the young people in the enhancement and the implementation of the NDCs, like I just mentioned before. This support is funneled through our youth engagement plan, which presents opportunities for increased meaningful engagement of young people in, for example, the design of youth inclusive processes, supporting the development of youth-led NDC implementation projects, strengthening capacities, encouraging young participation in global activities. And on this last point, we recently hosted our 3rd Youth Engagement Forum in July. I hope you had the opportunity to participate. We counted with a fantastic support from the Yongo NDC working group. So thank you very much again to Yongo for the support. The recordings are available in our website, in YouTube channel. So please, if you didn't have the possibility to attend, go check them out. And yeah, the work with this work is pretty much ongoing and cuts across other themes, including, of course, finance. So, as I mentioned before, we curate, we collect the requests for support from countries, and we share them with from our countries, and we share it with our partners. But we need to understand, for it, it's really important, and it's part of our mandate to understand what those requests are looking like, to see where the gaps are, where we can do better. And finance-related requests are definitely kind of a priority at this stage, and I will explain later why. But before talking a bit more about finance support trends, gaps and opportunities for enhanced collaboration, I would like to join Menti one more time, because I have one more question for you, just to get a clearer perspective of your understanding of this matter. So the next question that I have for you is, what do you think are some of the gaps in the current state of climate finance? How do requests for support look like? How do country needs look like? So great, I see already the first votes: integrating climate change into financial systems, engaging private sector, engaging stakeholders. Okay, investment planning, preparing projects. I see integrating climate change into financial systems and engaging the private sector. Interestingly, the two main categories. I think you will be surprised. Let's just give 10 more seconds 15 more seconds for more answers. Interesting. Integrating climate change into financial systems and engaging the private sector are, of course, important. All of these are important, but you will be surprised. So you can continue voting. I see it's already a trend that I don't expect to change. So let me go back to the presentation. Yeah, let me go back to the presentation. Great. So the finance support landscape. So we have at the NDC partnership, we have a database where we collect all the requests for support from countries. We have the possibility to categorize them, filter them, and process them to understand how what this support landscape is looking like. We've done so far, I mean, the NDC partnership has 6 years. We've done 2 of these assessments in the last 4 years. And interestingly, finance is the main area of support. So countries, most of the requests coming in, more than 1/3 are finance related compared to other categories. In fact, 85% of our countries have requested support on a finance related category. And this has skyrocketed over the last couple of years, because as I'm pretty sure you're aware, there was the NDC update cycle. Countries already updated their NDCs, now they're moving to implementation. And to implement NDCs, countries need resources, they need money, they need cooperation. So that's why we see a significant increase in requests related to finance. But from let's say this finance umbrella, within this finance umbrella, we have several subcategories of support. Some of them that we shared through the Menti. And as you can see, preparing projects, and which is the first one, preparing bankable projects and pipelines, and NDC investment planning related support, which is the last one, enacting and revising national strategies and plans, are the 2 main subcategories. And let me explain why. Preparing bankable projects has the most, is a category with the most requested category, right? It grew 36% compared to the last assessment. I forgot to mention the last analysis of our data that we did was we did it earlier this year. So these are very recent numbers. So 41% of all the requests belong to preparing bankable projects and pipelines. In terms of NDC investment planning, which is again enacting and revising national strategies and plan. I mean, requests, we don't have that many requests, but the trend, I mean, we see a 73% increase in the requests. And this continues to grow. So we are expecting more requests from countries related to NDC investment planning to come in the coming months, in the coming years, of course. So yeah, preparing bankable projects and the development of NDC investment plans are two of the main categories, and this sends us a very important message. Countries need a structured approach to mobilize finance, whether it is through preparing bankable projects and pipelines, or whether it is by strategizing and developing plans, investment plans, or finance strategy. And we as the partnership have the mandate to listen to this message, what data is telling us, and to be prepared to support countries. Interestingly, preparing bankable projects, I mean, it's the category that has the largest amount of requests, but is also attracting the lowest support. And this can be explained for two reasons. One, the volume is massive, so our capacity as a support unit, but also as a partnership to respond to those requests is, of course, limited. We cannot respond to everything, it's too much. And also, because the quality of the requests and the resources available from our partners are not enough to cope with the demand. In terms of the development of NDC investment plans or enacting and revising national strategies and plans, the scenario is different. Support is looking good, but we're expecting an increase in the requests coming in, so we need to be prepared. And that's why I'm going to talk about our NDC investment planning guide, because we think that we believe that the NDC investment planning guide can help us support countries both in preparing bankable projects and also, of course, in developing climate finance strategies or investment plans. So I'm going to talk about the guide, but I would like you to go to Menti one more time. And yeah, I mean, the trend didn't change. So you see, integrating climate change in financial systems and private sector engagement are important, of course, but the second and third are, the most requested support categories for us. That's interesting. Great. So I don't know if you've heard about NDC investment planning in the past. I'm curious to know a little bit more about your thoughts about the idea, your knowledge. So I would like you to name, what do you think are the three main components that an NDC investment plan should contain? So you can go back to Menti, remember the code 33170512. And I see the first reactions, quantifiable reductions of emissions. Of course, this is something that we expect NDCs to include, but as I will explain later, if NDCs do not include these, the NDC investment planning process is a great opportunity to do so. Clear projects and goals, of course. Priorities and plan to mobilize, excellent. Carbon emissions, of course, we need to, every NDC investment plan must have climate rational investment across all sectors, very important. Project running ability, of course. Emission reduction targets and strategies, financing and investment framework, monitoring, reporting, and transparency. Excellent. Looks like someone already read the guide. Reduction of carbon emissions, implementation guide. Okay, I see more here. Contribution of different sectors, of course. Amount of money, of course. Costing is very important. Addressing gaps, this is really important. And I'm going to talk about how the NDC investment planning process can help inform future NDC enhancement processes. Finance needs, Excellent. We can come back to your responses later, but let me jump back to the presentation one more time. And thank you very much. I mean, everything makes a lot of sense, and I'm glad to hear that you really have a good idea of what NDC investment planning is about. Okay, great. So why did we develop a guide? And as I mentioned before, there's a clear appetite from countries to work on NDC investment planning and project preparation. That's kind of an insight from the NDC, from the NDC partnership, right? And again, the NDC partnership, we have many countries, the most important development organizations in the world. So what we see from our data, it's a pretty good snapshot of what's going on worldwide. So it's safe to say that even if countries are having bilateral interactions with partners, and those two categories are, I would say without a question, the two most important, let's say, needs that countries have at this moment in terms of finance mobilization. But there's also a more general reflection on why NDC investment planning is important. And I'm pretty sure Xavi is gonna talk more about this in her presentation. But basically, we have enormous challenges in terms of mobilizing finance. We're falling short. We have only reached 1/10 of the finance mobilization estimations according to the State of the Climate Action. And this is especially the case for adaptation finance, and this is especially the case for finance in the developing world. Less than 25% of finance is mobilized in the developing world, so there are big challenges. And to put it in very simple words, there is a gap, there is a barrier between financiers and countries. And we have the mandate as the NDC partnership, and as a global community, we have the responsibility to make sure that we address this gap. And this barrier or this gap is made of several situations or issues, whether it is the lack of enabling environments for investments, whether it is the lack of private sector engagement, whether it is that there are not enough projects, finance ready or bankable projects out there. You name it, there is a barrier and we need to address it. And we think that through the NDC investment planning guide, we can help bridge the gap. We don't think that the NDC investment planning guide and the message is not that the NDC investment planning guide is the solution to this gap, to the climate finance mobilization challenges that we face, but it's definitely a tool that we expect to play a significant role and to have an impact. Great. This is why this February, after more than a year and a half of development, consultation, we launched our NDC investment planning guide. We didn't want to invent the wheel with this guide. We have a lot of experiences. We have from our countries, from our partners, best practices. Countries have already worked on NDC investment plan in the past. So we wanted to just collect all those experiences and just validate them through literature review and through expert and partner input. We organized several validation or consultation processes with partners, with countries, even with investors from the private sector. The guide is the target audience of the guide are governments, but the guide is flexible enough for civil society or the private sector to make good use of it. So now entering on the features and the characteristics of the guide, a very important feature, and I think this is one of the most important messages about the guide. The guide, with this guide, we want to combine, promote, or foster two different NDC investment planning approaches. One is the project-based, which is kind of a classic approach to investment planning. The project-based approach is basically based on the NDCs. Investments are identified, prioritized, and projects are developed to leverage international funding, whether it's GCF, International Climate Initiative, Multilateral Development Bank, you name it. But the idea is to leverage funds from internationally available funds. And we want to combine it. The idea is to combine it with a programmatic approach. In the programmatic approach, what we're trying to do is to promote an economy-wide and systemic transformation to make sure that the finance flows within an economy are redirected towards decarbonized and resilient pathways or trajectories. So it's not only about leveraging resources available internationally, but also about making the changes internally to make sure that there are transformations in the economy that contribute to climate objectives. And there are many instruments, actions, measures, or means that can be used to achieve this programmatic approach. And I'm pretty sure you've heard about some of them. Taxonomy, disclosure plays a very important role here. Thematic debt instruments, thematic bonds, green procurement, and also budgetary measures can play an important role in moving forward this programmatic approach. Another important message on the NDC investment planning process, and that we try, of course, to promote with our guide, is that there is still no magical solution to finance mobilization or investment planning. This guide is a contribution, but many things have to align for a country to effectively mobilize climate finance. It's important to mention that investment planning should build on a strong foundation of identified climate priorities, meaning that not only the NDC is the source for an investment plan. Even if the guide is called the NDC Investment Planning Guide, governments and partners can plan based on objectives or targets or commitments from national adaptation plans, long-term strategies, or any other policy instrument that has a strong climate rationale. Of course, NDC investment planning process is unique to each country. Each country has different capacities, resources, objectives, ambition. It's at a different stage of the investment planning process. So it's unique to each country. And the investment planning process that we're trying to promote with the guide should be dynamic and iterative. I mentioned the first point that it should be built on the base of identified climate priorities from NDCs. But also we think that it should be based on NDCs, but it should contribute to future NDC updates, right? So we see the NDC investment planning as the continuum of the NDC investment in the NDC enhancement process. So the NDC investment planning process starts with the NDC and helps inform future NDCs, right? So the sector identification, prioritization, the costing of investments, the stakeholder engagement processes that take place during the investment planning process should inform the future NDC investment planning process. And this is a very important message that we like to share. So entering into the stages of the guide, I'm going to make a super quick overview of the stages of the guide, just to mention that we have three main stages. First, investment planning capacity. This is a cross-cutting stage. It should, the output or the activities that we suggest as part of this stage should take place across the whole investment planning process. not only in the beginning. Then we have investment needs identification and prioritization. I will explain a little bit more about each stage in later. And then investment mobilization. As I mentioned before, each country has different capacities. It's at a different stage in the investment planning process. So the guide should not be seen as a manual or as a receipt for success. It should be seen as a menu of options. So for example, if a country has strong investment capacities and has already identified and prioritized investments, and they only need support and investment mobilization, they can easily go to that section of the guide and look at the resources and the guidance provided there, and so on and so on. So countries, we don't want to be prescriptive here. So really quick overview of the stages. Again, the stage 1 is cross-cutting investment planning capacity. During this stage, all the institutional arrangements that facilitates the prioritization of investments and the mobilizations of finance are set. This includes all the institutional arrangements, establishing clear mandates and roles within the institutionality. Stakeholder engagement takes place here. Remember, this is cross-cutting, so stakeholder engagement should take place along the NDC investment planning process. And by engagement, we don't mean informing or validating. We mean really a strong engagement, co-developing, co-creating the NDC investment plan. And then also we set the foundations for all the monitoring and reporting tools and instruments or strategies, including the feedback process for the NDC. I'm not gonna dive too deep into the examples, but I mean, you can see the example from the slides. I'm sharing examples from each of the stages. Stage 2, investment needs identification and prioritization. During this stage, investments are identified based on the policy instrument. In this case, it will be the NDC, the NAP, LTS, or any other policy instrument, again, with a strong climate rationale. NDC investment needs are costed, and a financing gap analysis should be done as part of this stage. Basically, what is the cost of NDCs and what resources are available, so countries can get a better idea or sense of where the resources are needed in which investment, which sector, etc. And of course, based on this gap analysis, investments are prioritized. If an investment doesn't need much support, then countries would focus in the investments or that require more support, or they can just decide to go with the low-hanging fruit. That's a very sovereign decision of each country. And finally, investment mobilization. In this stage, based on the based on the prioritized investments, the barriers for those investments are identified and addressed, whether it's through policies, regulations, financial instruments, or any other programmatic means, like I mentioned before, budget tagging, by establishing taxonomies, or any other financial instrument, by working on debt instruments, bonds, etc. During this stage, also the prioritized investments are matched with the sources of finance, whether it's multilateral development banks, funds, private sector investments, etc. Of course, we also encourage countries to work on project preparation, conceptualizing ideas, so they can access the financing, the funding sources, and also ultimately the idea is that countries have a clear sequence or a roadmap to finance their NDCs. This is the full picture of the NDC investment planning. You see we have 3 stages. We have 11 components, and we have, I think it's like 50 steps that, of course, I'm not going to share right now because it's not very didactic, but I mean, you can check the guide and just explore a little bit more what we are trying to promote, share with countries. Again, the guide is not a manual, it's a menu, and countries or stakeholders can make use of it however it fits their needs. And just to complement, talk a little bit more about the resources that we have and that we offer to our community and to the public. Besides the NDC investment planning guide, we have our climate toolbox. This toolbox is like a database of tools, guidance documents, initiatives, platforms that can help countries advance their climate enhancement processes or implementation processes. So we have resources on climate finance here, resources to engage the private sector, to work on projects, to work on the development of financial instruments, you name it. And we also have the Climate Funds Explorer. The Climate Funds Explorer, as you can see here, it's a searchable database of public climate funds and related support. So if a stakeholder, a country is looking for support for a mitigation project in South America, and this person represents civil society, then they can filter the information and look for those resources that match their needs. Yeah, so I invite you to go to ndcpartnership.org and explore our resources. We also we have the NDC investment planning guide there, but we also have best practice briefs or documents where we share what countries have done on NDC investment planning. We have summaries in several languages, blogs, and we continue to include more resources for our community. So, in the beginning, I mentioned that I have a surprise. I don't know if it's a pleasant surprise, but it's a surprise. So now I have a short quiz that I would like to share, that I would like you to participate in, just to see if some of the main messages that I shared with you today are clear. But anyway, we are going to have the opportunity to discuss after the quiz a little bit more about my presentation, to listen to your questions. So again, I invite you to go to menti.com using the QR or the code. Sorry. And we can start the quiz. I see many people joining. So there's only 3 questions, right? So let's say if all of you get them right, the one that answers the fastest wins. I don't have a prize, but maybe your colleagues can offer a prize for you later. Okay, 22. I see we have 64 participants. Let's get to 40 at least. Great. Interesting to see all the different icons. 28. Let's make it to 40 at least. 32, 31. Oh, come on. 9 more. Let's go. Great. I like that volcano. 33. Okay, I think I'm gonna let's start the quiz. Again, 3 questions. Whoever answers the fastest wins. 3 questions. First question. According to the State of the Climate Action 2022, how much global climate finance is needed by 2030? Okay. Everyone has voted. Let's see. Okay, I think we would, okay. Okay, most of you got it right. 5.2 trillion annually. Let's see who answered the fastest. Okay. Strawberry. Who's a strawberry? I'm curious. We can let's see when we when you answer the two questions, maybe we can expose the winner. But yeah, most of you doing pretty good so far. Next question. What is the main finance related support request to the NDC partnership? Let's go. 20 more seconds. Everyone has voted. Let's see. Okay, NDC investment planning. Remember, project preparation is the main request category. NDC investment planning and private sector engagement are also very important. But project preparation is a there's a big gap in terms of project preparation worldwide, not only NDC partnership. And so this is a very important message for you. Let's see the leaderboard. Okay. Let's see what, okay, strawberry. D is first. Good. Strawberry is still in the race. Come on. Okay. One, and the fastest was DK. Interesting. Next question. Let's go. What approaches does the NDC investment planning guide combine? Systemic and programmatic, project-based and programmatic, project-based and region-based. We're almost there. Everyone has voted. And we ended up with 36 participants, which is pretty good. Appreciate the participation. Project-based and programmatic, great. Project-based and region-based, not so much. And systemic and programmatic, you could argue that it's the same thing, but it's good that most of you got it right. So now let's see the leaderboard. Magical Rhino doing good. Nice name. Let's see the leaderboard. Kausi. Is Kausi the winner? Let me see if there's one more slide announcing the winner. Yeah, so I cannot go back. But Kausi, you won. Yongo is gonna give you a nice prize, I hope. So yeah, that will be my presentation. Thank you very much for participating in the Menti. Please visit our website. We have, again, a lot of resources for our community. So yeah, thank you very much. Leona, back to you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Adrian. Again, as we always do, virtual claps, please. Yeah, and Adrian, if you can see the chat room, everyone is really like saying thank you in the way they can. So thank you very
Great.
much. I mean, that was very informative. And to all our participants, like I mentioned earlier, in case you're wondering the face behind the voice, I'm using a different systems talk and I'm saying hi and waving at everybody right now on my other screen. Yeah, thank you, Adrian. Yes, so we're gonna have a very quick Q&A section with Adrian. So we're gonna do this in two ways. I'm not sure a mental link is available for that. Um, you could use the raise hand function and I will call you to ask you question. Remember, we have another speaker up and we don't have all of the time right now. So use the raise hand function, please, and then I will call you. Otherwise, you can type into the chat room, but right now the chat room is very busy. So just use the raise hand function and please keep your questions very brief, straight to the point, so Adrian can quickly respond to you. So anyone going? Anybody raising their hands? Want to speak? Yeah, I can see Bruna, I can see Isabella. Okay. So I'm just going to unmute you, Bruna, and so you could tell.
Hi, Adrian. I hope you can hear me well. Thank you very much for the presentation. My name is Bruna. I'm currently working with Sustainable Finance for the Global Landscapes Forum, and I've been conducting a feasibility study to actually understand how, especially small-scale projects, can enhance their bankability to become somehow attractive for investors. And I've run a questionnaire with some small-scale projects, and I've realized that one of the main things preventing them from enhancing their bankability is actually the lack of knowledge. So, for example, they don't know where the opportunities are or how to access those opportunities. So, based on your experience, do you see any kind of solution for this gap? Thank you very much.
Great, thank you, Bruna. I was having a hard time hearing you, but just to understand, you're working on, you want to know how we can make sure, can you hear me?
Yeah,
I cannot hear you, Lona. I don't know if it's my computer, but
Hi, can you hear me?
now I do. Now I do.
So I've run a questionnaire with some small-scale projects, mainly based in Africa and Latin America, to understand what were the main challenges when they are trying to apply for grants or loans or some kind of funding. And I've realized that the main challenge is actually the lack of knowledge. So they don't know what the opportunities are and how to access those opportunities.
Yeah.
So based on your experience, you have some kind of solution to try to help them with this challenge? Thank you very much.
Yeah, no, great, excellent question. And you're...
Hi, Adrian.
Can
you hear me now?
Yeah,
yes. So I was saying maybe you could just take down the remaining 2 questions so we you answer everything at once for the sake of time.
So I can
Isabel, please go on. Isabella, please go on.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Great. Thank you so much for the presentation, Adrian. It was very insightful. Sorry I can't turn on my camera right now, but I hope you can hear me well. I have 2 questions. I work in the Global Green Growth Institute, and we work very closely with GCF programs with our partner countries. And first, we have recently started developing our projects in loss and damage, and we are trying to structure now programmatic solutions for loss and damage agendas that are different from adaptation projects. So I wanted to know if you have any insights on how discussions will be with this new agenda and how we can bring focus to this, as well as not lose focus on adaptation, which is also very important when we discuss with countries how they implement their NDC strategies. And secondly, working with GCF, we see that our projects are shifting from being very focused on the financing is shifting from being focused on giving money to the countries to being focused on giving money to specific projects. And that is very difficult for projects that are more focused on adaptation or in a smaller scale compared to projects that are focused on infrastructure and energy, transportation, etc. And I wanted to also have your opinion on how we can try to bring more investments to these small scale projects as opposed to the large infrastructure ones. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Isabella and Bruna. Isabella, I'm sorry, I don't know if it's my computer. I had a hard time hearing you, but I think I got the message. But anyway, let me see. I'm going to try to respond. And I think both of you highlighted 2.
Hi, Adrian.
Yes.
We still have Stephen up, so we have 1 more person, and he's the last person. So after Stephen, you can go.
Okay.
Stephen.
Yeah, hi, Andre. Thank you. I'm sorry, I've unmuted myself. Hi, yeah, so I'm from Jamaica. And I'd love to hear your perspective on how the NDC process is working for small island states, especially as we have quite a few small island participants here on the call and in the program. Because we have the most to lose, right, from the climate change. And so this is very important to many of our national governments of implementing the NDC process. And then many of us might be wanting to work in project finance in our home countries.
Great. 1 second, taking note here. Great. Okay, I'm gonna try to, very, very good questions. First, I think Bruna and Isabel highlighted two of the most important challenges right now in terms of mobilizing finance, which is the preparation of projects and how those projects can access funds. There are limited capacities in terms of project preparation, but why there are limited capacities in project preparation? Because accessing funds is extremely complicated and time demanding, and it's a very difficult process that demands a lot of capacities, resources from, in this case, countries. We know firsthand that, for example, GCF is working on this, and also the idea of having the NDC partnership is that we can facilitate that dialogue or can intermediate between financiers and the sources of financial support and the countries. We are, as we speak, we are working on let's say some type of guidance document with GCF to access their resources using our NDC investment planning guide. So basically the idea is, how can our NDC investment planning guide inform countries in accessing GCF resources? This is of course very, very difficult for small scale projects because to access, for example, GCF, Jeff, or those big bags of resources, you need big enough projects that are big enough, right? There are other possibilities to finance smaller projects through other types of through cooperation from other sources. But one of the challenges here is, how do we engage the private sector in this type of projects, whether it's through direct investments or blended finance. We know that multilateral development banks are working to try to mobilize more resources for smaller projects, and not only smaller projects, but also smaller nations that are suffering the most from the impacts of climate change, like Stephen mentioned. Isabella, so I didn't get your question on programmatic approaches clearly, but one thing that I can say about programmatic approaches is that, and also to set expectations, if you open a guide and you go to the section where we talk about programmatic approaches, it's not like you're gonna get enlightened and you're gonna get all the answers. I mentioned in my presentation, the guide is not like the magical solution. It's a resource that we hope can start discussions. It starts a process or a momentum to gather more lessons that motivates countries to start exploring other ways to mobilize finance that is not only through leveraging external resources from funds, but also what changes can countries do internally to mobilize resources. This is critical. GCF, Jeff, IKI, and Adaptation Fund, those resources are not enough. We need to do more. We need not only governments, we need also the private sector to step up. And Stephen, regarding your question, perspective of NDCs, this is not the talking like Adrian, not NDC partnership, because I used to work in the Caribbean. I have, some experience in the Caribbean. I used to work with the IDB in the Caribbean, and but even though I have experience working in the Caribbean, I know what's happening in countries is so different, because countries, it's a small region, but so many things are happening. So for example, you have countries like Guyana and Suriname that have a lot of oil. So their NDCs maybe are not that ambitious. We have other countries like Jamaica that is doing excellent, amazing things on ecosystem conservation, mangrove conservation, all the work they're doing with the energy sector is great, and other small nations like the Bahamas, and also working on nature-based solutions and carbon sequestration, blue carbon, and overall the region, you see a big movement towards the blue economy. But there are challenges, right? And the challenge is that these countries can do a lot in terms of mitigation, but the challenge is in terms of adaptation, and mobilizing finance for adaptation is more difficult than for mitigation, because for a mitigation project could be like a solar farm, like a facility, but for adaptation it's more difficult to measure the impacts, and that is one of the factors that it's not attracting investors, that they cannot see the impact of projects. But yeah, no, I mean, discussions, we could talk for an hour about this, but happy to connect with you later. I'm gonna drop my email in the chat box, and if I didn't answer your questions, maybe we can have a chat later. Over, Luana.
Okay, thank you so much, Adrian. I hope you can hear me. Yes. Let me just check quickly. Yes, you can hear me. Thank you so much, Adrian. And I believe all of the participants here have learned a lot from you with regards to the work you do at NDC Partnership and helping developing countries and institutions to develop climate plans that are, of course, that can, receive the necessary support over time. And then for you, for the tools that they also need to mobilize the necessary resources and the trends across the support landscape. Thank you so much. I'm sure that the participants, honestly, I've learned a lot. And maybe one thing we're going to do is incorporate participant feedback on each of our speakers so that you can get to see what participants are saying about you. Okay. So thank you very much, Adrian. And Adrian has also put his email address on the chat box, so you could always reach out to him, ask him any questions, and even if you drop it on the WhatsApp group as well, I'm sure we can also pick it up from there and send to him as well. Either way, that works. So this is a wrap for the first section. We will be moving over to the second section, but we're gonna take a 2 minutes virtual break. So in case you want to grab a cup of coffee, you want to use the ladies, you want to use the gents, you want to do something, 2 minutes, please stretch your legs so that we could continue. We have over another 30 minutes to go, if I'm not mistaken. So please, 2 minutes, and I'm also gonna go grab something. So Okay, so 2 minutes over. I see people in the chat box asking if the section is over. No, it's not over. It was just a virtual break here. So we're moving over to I don't know if Adrian is still here, but Adrian, once again, thank you very much as we move on to Chavi Mitchell. So I'm just gonna read her bio, and you know how we do it. You give me, for Adrian, we gave him virtual claps. For Chavi, we're gonna give her virtual thumbs up. Okay, so yeah, let me go to that. So, Chavi Mitchell is a manager in Climate Policy Initiatives London office. She leads CPI's national tracking workstream, which aims to provide targeted support for countries to implement their climate finance tracking activities and develop their national strategies to implement their NDCs. She brings with her expertise in tracking and evaluating global and national climate finance trends and climate policies. She has recently led the UNFCCC's biennial assessment and overview of climate finance flows reports and landscape of climate finance in Africa, and currently working on a South Africa climate finance landscape. Chavi holds a master's degree in public administration from the London School of Economics. Her points today we cover the highlights in climate finance landscaping, especially on how they're measured and reported. This includes the definitions, methodologies, and data sources. This will also include processes of climate finance tracking, the best practices and lessons based on CPI's regional and national tracking work. It will also include any other key or recent project that, the CPI will want to showcase. And finally, all drawing from the African Landscape Interactive Country Level Dashboard. So please give her a virtual thumbs up in the chat room as we welcome Chavimitu to the floor. So I'm just gonna share her screen, her presentation, okay, from my end, so everyone can see it. Yeah, Chavi, I'm sure you could see this thumbs up, right?
Yeah. I can. Thank you so much, Alona, for the introduction. And before I start, I also want to thank Adrian for setting up the framework so beautifully, because that allows me to now delve into more technicalities on certain elements that he mentioned. And his presentation won't be, at least my presentation won't be as interactive as his, but hopefully there's enough infographic insights and probably keep you up on a late Friday evening for most of you, I think. So yeah, I'll try to keep it more interesting and keep it short as well, where possible. Great. Can you go on the second slide, please? Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Just before I start, I just want to give a quick introduction of what Climate Policy Initiative and CPI, and pardon me if I use too many acronyms as well. But CPI, we kind of help government, businesses, and financial institutions drive economic growth while addressing climate change. We're known for tracking sustainable climate finance trends at both global, national, and sectoral level, and also identifying and supporting innovative financing instruments through our lab structure. But what's more relevant for today's conversation is our tracking and mapping one that you see on the left. And we have more than a decade of experience in doing so. It started back in 2010. So very, very excited to give you all a glimpse of, how we do what we do, basically. You want to go to the next slide, please? No, next slide, please. Yeah. I think the first question is really, I think there's something starting with basic, like why should we be really tracking climate finance and needs, right? And you probably might have covered this in some previous sessions, but just want to give you a bit more use case and visuals here. Next slide, please. So yes, I think so first part is at least kind of understanding, what is the nature and magnitude of domestic and international climate flows that are going into a country that can really help you with planning and budgeting, because it really sets a baseline understanding of, what your needs are. And that really will help you shape your specific policy reforms or responses. help you kind of develop financial mechanisms, develop financing strategies, and instruments. Can you click again? And then there's, of course, we want to increase more transparency and accountability and trust among all the relevant stakeholders and capital providers, right? And that's where the MRV or the monitoring, reporting, evaluation concept becomes really important. And this is what we also does, and a lot of our reports kind of really feed into the international and national reporting processes, whether it's the UNFCCC programs and enhanced transparency framework requirements, and also important more so because a lot of donors these days also have certain reporting requirements, right? So the transparency aspect becomes really important. And then the third part, which Adrian also kind of mentioned, and it's basically take this climate finance tracking and understanding. It's just about the means and not the ends, right? We kind of think about how to mobilize resources, and that is where it becomes really important to see numbers in front of us, and that really forms the basis of cross-sectoral and cross-government and government donor discussions, and how to really prioritize and mobilize the climate action, climate finance that's really needed in any country, or even globally or nationally or subnationally. Yeah, just to give you a bit more visuals, the next slide, please. This is something called a Sankey diagram, or maybe you can even call it like a spaghetti diagram. And more so because CPI's first office actually was in Italy, so probably maybe but officially it's called a Sankey diagram, and the CPI kind of built many of these. This is the one I picked up from a Cote d'Ivoire landscape that we did, I think it was back in 2017, where we kind of tracked the investments that were going into land use, right? And the green, and this kind of tells you, what were the sources, what were the instruments, what disbursement channels they were used, what sectors it really went to, or this is more specific to land use, so you'll probably see more subsectors out here. And if you see the chunk, right, like the green chunk are the finance that was climate aligned, and the gray one really tells you those are those that were not aligned to the forest and climate objectives, right? And such results really form the basis for interministerial coordination on REDD implementation in Cote d'Ivoire. And kind of help understand how to mainstream where we're basically going wrong, right? This basically graph will help you kind of decipher that a bit. Just the next slide as well. This is again from sector, a landscape I did in Kenya, and just want to highlight these because this is like a powerful graphic, right? Because it tells you what the country's needs are by sector, and which is the darker green bars here, and the lighter ones are actually telling you how much finance those are receiving, right? And it tells you where you're overachieving or underachieving, where the finance really needs to flow. So for instance, sectors like energy and health and manufacturing may appear to be on track on the need, but investment in most other sectors is falling short. The next graphic, next slide, please. And this is an Africa landscape that we did. This again tells you the same story, but more at regional level. I'll dive in more into details, but it just really tells you what the financing needs are and how much finance is flowing, how concentrated it is. So yeah, I hope I've sort of established the use case of why we're talking what we're talking today. Can you go on the next slide, please? So yeah, I think I wanted to talk to you through about how to conduct a landscaping exercise, how to really quantify those. Next slide, please. And there's some really key building blocks out there. This is probably an old slide, but anyway. But this really tells you different building blocks that are there, right? It is telling you how when you kind of start thinking about what you want to track in a country, like climate finance flows, builder taxonomies, etc. This is really a more structured way of thinking through it. Like you want to do your scoping, you want to understand what stakeholders you want to engage with, you want to build definitions, you want to set the mapping framework, you data collection exercise, and so on and so forth. I will not be able to go through all these building blocks because there's a whole detail in there, but want to cover a few important aspects out of these, and please go through the sources. I think I probably have mentioned in here we have a toolkit out there which kind of gives you a step-by-step guide there, like Excel sheets and Word templates on what sort of questions you should be asking each of those steps, how you actually going to be doing. So it's so yeah, it's a pretty detailed handbook. Have a look at it, I'll suggest. Yeah, next slide, please. sorry, yeah, this one. Yeah. So I think, first thing is really what is climate finance, right? How it is really defined. And unfortunately, there's no universally accepted definition of climate finance. And this really causes a lot of problems, for tracking investments to assessing the effectiveness of those. So for example, you'll be hearing a lot about like 100 billion and now the new collective quantified goal in climate finance, right? And which is basically the commitment that was made at COP21, I think, by high income countries to mobilize 100 billion US dollars annually by 2020 to support lower income countries' transition. And there is, as you see, and you'll be hearing at different COPs and all the events, that there's tensions around that, surrounding those commitments. But again, there's one of them is actually lack of agreement of what really counts climate finance in that. And this is really the reason Climate Policy Initiative was also established the very good 10 years back, right? We have a more detailed methodology out there. You probably have all the material, and I can also share with you after this session a dedicated meeting. But there are all these different methodologies out there that I would like to, like, if you're interested, then please go through it. Yeah, there's all these, sorry, can you go back? I just want to talk through the bit about, like, they have this OECD ones, there's a MDB, Common Principles of Climate Mitigation, there's IDFC, which is the International Development Finance Club, and, different taxonomies by out there. And then this is just at a global and, probably at more institutional level. And then on the next slide, we have like these different national taxonomies out there. This map really shows different jurisdictions that are currently developing or really have published or currently draft their green taxonomies, like ASEAN or, India or South Africa, and, a lot of other countries have these taxonomies in place. I think one thing I want to mention is that, and they follow these different methodologies and approaches, right? Like, think of it like one taxonomy is based on a white list of projects that are eligible as climate finance. Whereas sometimes the other taxonomies could be basically providing the technical screening criteria or thresholds, and, of economic activities, and, how they comply to a specific climate objective. And then there's principle-based approach, which is kind of set core principles. So, and some taxonomies could be a combination of all these as well. So there are different taxonomies and different methodologies out there. But, and you may ask, and if you go just the next slide, but the important takeaway I really want to give you is that, important, these are not existing in silos, they are interlinked, they're feeding on each other. And somebody, I think, mentioned that, the reporting in the chat, I think reporting, there's convergence a bit of reporting, etc. That is partly true, if not entirely true. So what this map really shows you, and it's a complex one, there's a link out there, I don't know if you can really clearly read it, but that's really the takeaway. There are certain common activities that identify in each of the taxonomies. So if you look at the inner part, the inner things, the center of it, where we identified that, out of the 12 taxonomies we kind of reviewed, there were like 75% of those taxonomies really have those common activities. And as you move further and further away, there could be some less common activities, and they're completely exclusion. So for instance, when you go out of the other circle, you see energy sector, nuclear power. Certain taxonomies included, French considered as like climate finance, but other economies or other taxonomies does not consider it. Like MDB is another one. So yeah, there is commonalities, there are differences, but yeah, and that's why I say it's sort of important when you're kind of working on a national landscape to kind of kind of absorb all these taxonomies and kind of understand what countries, NDCs or sectors or priorities are when you're deciding what is climate finance for them, and, what you should be tracking and what you should not be tracking. And there's a whole exclusion list as well. I don't want to go into those details. Just also want to mention, this is more like mitigation based, but like adaptation, and I think somebody mentioned on adaptation as well, that it's probably easier for mitigation because you have like a eligible list of projects that you can identify, but for adaptation, it's like a different animal altogether, right? And that is based on more process-based screening methodologies that countries or institutions apply to identify what project is adaptation, because you need to set out, and there's sort of different layers to it, right? Like, you need to first understand the vulnerability context of the project, whether it's contributing to that, what vulnerability it is addressing in a country. then you need to make that explicit intent of the link between the project, how it's going to address those vulnerability, and have that direct link. So yeah, adaptation is a lot more trickier concept to kind of kind of make it in a taxonomy, a proper taxonomy. On this slide, what she's sharing, what Ilona is sharing with us, I also want to touch base a bit about the scoping exercise, right? It's not like always you need to track everything, all the sectors, everything, mitigation, adaptation, everything. It really depends where your NDCs or your documents, what are your priority sectors? Do you are for a country adaptation, mitigation are both a primary concern? What are the major emitting sectors? Do you want to also think about whether you just want to track at a national level, or do you want to go much deeper subnational level? Maybe, for instance, subnational tracking would become relevant for countries where more decentralized governance and budget systems are there. That could be helpful. Do you want to do like an ex post analysis of like how much finance the country received historically, or do you want to do more forward estimations how it's going to do? So it's more like understanding what temporal coverage or what periods, etc. you want to capture. And so on and so forth. Do you want to also track, like, I know, like for Cote d'Ivoire, you saw that there was like, we track both the climate aligned and less climate not aligned finance as well, right? But we necessarily can't, we may not have such information every time on all the different sectors. So yeah, these are the calls, and these are the things that you kind of think through, questions that you think through, and these are all sort of available in that guideline in a proper format. These are like just I picked up a few to give you sort of examples here. And again, primary and secondary transaction, right? What's the difference? That primary investments are like those climate investments that kind of lead into asset creation, whereas secondary transactions, say in the bond markets, etc. Like at least that's I'll give that a little specific example, but we don't want to change we don't want just that's basically just money exchanging hands, right? There may not be an asset creation against it. So these are all these different questions and scoping ideas that you think about when kind of doing any such analysis. Next slide, please. And there is this there's no dearth of taxon methodologies that are available out there. And I'm sorry, there are a lot of acronyms out there, but I think you'll probably see more detailed fuller explanations of these acronyms in the guideline, but just want to give you highlights. So CBT, for instance, is climate budget tagging systems. All these methodologies basically sort of vary in their objectives and coverage and different type of finances that they track or not track. So it really depends on what study, what is your scope. And that's when I mentioned, like, scoping becomes really important thing to understand. So for instance, if you want to do IFF and IS is basically something that does more forward-looking assessments on cost analysis of NDCs. So maybe if that is your interest, that's a methodology you can pick it up. Most others I think are more ex post analysis, like after the expenses or expenditures have happened. Then you have the climate budgeting tagging system that is limited or focused on private sector investments, if that is again not a concern. And then the landscape, sorry. Yeah, somebody need to unmute their mic, please. And yeah. And then there's landscape, right, which is like which we kind of showed you, and I'm going to show you a bit more also, which is tracking both private and public investments and international investments. So yeah, it all depends on what your scope is, what methodology you're going to apply. All these materials out there. We don't really need to completely reinvent the wheel. It's just about matter, and that's what I keep saying. We don't need to attain perfection in any tracking. It happens when you kind of do it iteratively, right? Like it's just matter like starting and getting onto it basically. Next slide, please. Yeah, and I mean, I won't go into entire detail, but these are like some of the dimensions, and I just want to give you the whole ecosystem of it, right? Like right now, there's a lot of out there to unpack. When I talk about sources and intermediaries in that Sankey diagram that you saw there, this barrage of actors that you can track and you should track depending on what the scope is. There's public finance providers, private. Then what instruments are used by them to transact those things? Is it debt? It is concession finance? Is it grants? What sort of instruments are being used? And then there's these disbursement channels, that are used to render your international finance in those particular countries, either through governments and all that, because that will have a lot of bearing on your double counting. And I'm going to talk maybe a bit more about that later. And then, of course, the sectors, whether it's mitigation, adaptation, within mitigation is energy or transport. So those sort of data dimensions you kind of need to think through, and you can hopefully track. And, you know, we encounter sort of different issues at different level. And, you know, we have just tried to discuss and share our experiences and, you know, what approach did we take to kind of address those. So for instance, it's very difficult sometimes to differentiate between your implementing agency, your financing agency, and your final recipient beneficiary of it. And sometimes when you're collecting data, you may be getting these data sets from these different perspectives, but you just need to kind of understand what perspective you're taking. So if, say, for instance, you're taking an international donor financing or, you know, public financing that's coming in through, you need to identify the disbursement channel it's going through. Because again, if you happen to even collect data from a disbursement agency for some reason, there'll be sort of double counting, you know, overstating your climate finance, right? So that understanding of where different actors are positioned in the value chain, you know, can help you kind of address this issue. Yeah, and also, do you want to go to the next slide, please? Yeah. Thanks. So yeah, again, data sources. You have a whole list of it, of data sources that we've been using to track finance, etc. But just want to really highlight, you know, some of the issues we may encounter at different levels. So I think one example I can give, and these are like sort of different questions you should be asking, because that will really help you kind of understand what you should be tracking again. One example I can give is, let me pick up like maybe like government budgets, how they are structured, right? Now government budget can be national or local. It represents the government's projected revenue expenditure for those fiscal years, right? So kind of understanding what, and they usually divide into different aspects, right? So you have the recurrent expenditure that is like on salaries of personnel or stationery or renters, etc. Then there's investment expenditure that leads to an interest in an asset being created or, you know, expenditure that's being created. And then the third aspect is there like transfer payments which are made without exchange. So you kind of need to understand, and this is the issue we got at Maximum Time with when we kind of involve including or doing some climate budget tagging for certain countries, to kind of see what should be included, right, and what should be excluded in climate finance. So you take all these calls and, you know, kind of work closely with the ministries and, you know, like National Treasury, the Ministry of Finance, wherever the data is housed, to kind of understand what you can include, what should you not exclude. Yes, I highly recommend you to kind of go through the toolkit, data toolkit. And now I think I can move on. Is this the next slide, Ilona? Or
Okay.
can we move to the case study? Yeah, again, this is something I mentioned, but yeah, I just want to give you more visuals out here on the findings. Can you go to the finding one? I think let me pick on the Africa case study and the global. Yeah. Next slide, please. So yeah, I mean, just a bit to give you a bit of context, what we do is a kind of a global climate finance tracking that also feeds into UNFCCC biannual assessment reports. We do it biannually as well, more fuller landscape. But last year we did an Africa landscape, which is what I'm going to kind of show some interesting insights that emerge out of such activities and how, you know, probably you can use the results or what sort of results it really renders such exercise. Want to showcase a bit of that. But what this graph really is like telling you is the global climate finance flows that has been steadily increased, you know, over the past a decade. It's almost kind of doubled, right? And it's reaching what 65 billion in 2020, and we have like a new study that's going to come up in November, and that will give you a lot more breakdowns by sectors and everything. There's all these the previous reports also out there. And this increase, if you may ask, it was mainly driven by renewable energy and transport. However, you know, despite this increase, the current investment levels are so significantly short of the estimated needs. And probably that's no surprise as well, right, to any of you. And the next slide is where the real deal is. Now you see this 850 out here. Can you move to the next slide and see this where 850 really stand in terms of the needs, right? I know, I think Adrian showed a 5.2 trillion. So I think maybe there's some some number of sectors or regions that excluded or included, and this probably there is a new estimate. This was like previous report as well. So, but yeah, just look at the range, like look at the median that we're looking at and where we are standing right now, right? So despite the seemingly dramatic funding gap, if you really put things in larger context, it's just 5% of the global GDP needs that are out there. So, yeah, I mean, aligning finance with your 1.5 path would really demand to cut the financing of high emission activities and some resources to be reallocated to climate finance. But yeah, the slide I want to show you what this really can show you, like how much we have climate finance flowing and what are the real needs are. So all those assessments out there. Next slide, please. So yeah, this is Africa slide. This is emerging from the Africa landscape study that we did, like more deep dive into Africa. And here again, the story does not come as a surprise. What we estimated based on the NDC submissions that the country made of needs, we need like $280 billion annually for African countries to implement their own NDCs, and it's no surprise again for failing short dramatically. We were only able to track like 30 billion of climate finance in that region. So yeah, I mean, we probably need a 9x increase in climate finance out there. And we were able to track both public and private. As you see, the private chunk is really a small portion, and I'll talk a bit more about that as well. Yeah, and the gap could be even larger. I mean, there are, of course, data limitations and tracking. I mean, I can talk about that later as well in the questions if we have more time. But the truth is that the gap could be even larger because countries often underestimate their financial needs, especially as I mentioned, because of adaptation needs. It's sort of methodical challenges that they're out there in costing and, including those. So yeah, I mean, the point here is like, and somebody I think also mentioned the chat initially, take away from different session that time is of essence. Dealing action will cost the continent more and more. And when you see the socioeconomic, ecological, and development benefits of having these climate investments, they far outweigh this 280 billion or those sort of needs that the countries have. Next slide, please. This may overwhelm you a little bit, so apologies for that, but it's kind of shows you what are the sources of finance. So if you see domestic international financing, majority of that was international public finance flowing in Africa, around I think more than 85%. Majority is coming from multilateral and different sort of DFIs, whether they're multilateral, which is basically the center pillar, right? You see multilateral, bilateral, and national DFIs. And also interesting to see, and this conversation we've been having, kind of also being discussed a bit. That majority, and if you move to the right side pillar, you see most of it is coming in terms of in project level, in sort of debt, maybe concessional, non-concessional, but that's lowest. The big chunk of finance is coming through that, and that is concerning as well. But yeah, we can talk about that as well. Next slide, please. And this one really kind of, I just want to put a bit more perspective and compare it with our global numbers. So if you see Africa, which is like probably the third, I think the sixth pillar here. So you see 86% of this public finance, and 14% is private finance. And this is very low compared to the other regions, maybe like if compared with South Asia or East Asia Pacific and Latin America, it's easily in range of 35 to maybe 40% of them is mostly private finance. So yeah, private finance is a problem that's not flowing to countries, and we can talk about more about the reasonings on those things. There's actually a brief also that we did on that, on the different barriers each of the sectors face in Africa. So yeah, happy to kind of direct you to those. But this really highlights the opportunities, right? And this really, I mean, I don't want to give a grim picture at all and make you all depressed on a Friday. Probably spoil your weekends around it. But yeah, the private sector is really important here, how they can step up, what policymakers can do to get you the right regulatory environment and policy decisions, etc. So these are the conversations that, the insights that we can kind of think about by doing such exercise. Next slide, please. Just to give you a bit of mitigation, adaptation split up. I know somebody mentioned it's both, it's important, very rightly so. And Africa really strikes a really good balance. I mean, at least in the so far the data has been collected. Adaptation, mitigation, it strikes a good balance between the two. Which is sort of interesting finding and a positive trend given Africa's disproportionately high vulnerability to climate change, right? So it's pretty much what it really needs. Because if you compare globally, and I don't have the global numbers here, but like globally, it's adaptation finances between 5 to 15% of their total climate adaptation. For other regions, where Africa, it's like a good 39%, right? But yeah, again, not to say that we are achieving what all we should be achieving, but yet the volumes remain comparatively low, right? We saw it in the initial slides against the estimated needs. Next slide, please. Again, this slide is more like to put things in larger context, right? Like we were able to track, renewable energy sector, which tracked the maximum investment in African region. It is more attractively, commercially at least, more attractive for most countries, if not all. That stands near like $9.50, right? And as the block shows, this is significantly less than the fossil fuel-based investments and all the subsidies and everything that the region achieves. So it's almost like 4 times. And it's not to say subsidies are subsidies, fossil fuel subsidies. That so basically the point here I want to make is that while all spending cannot be green, we can't expect that. Government can structure taxes and your incentives, and that favors low carbon alternatives and ensure long-term benefits on job creation, energy dependence, etc. And a key starting point again is kind of think through like how much finance is flowing into these sectors, green finance, tag and track those investments and interventions, and that's when budget taggings and climate finance tracking really becomes important to make those right policy decisions, just to understand where we are. So yes. And is there any more slide? Oh yeah, this is just an example again. We try to break a big Sankey to more digestible pillars. So you just have C3. Most of other Sankeys would probably have 4 or 5 pillars from our side. But so if you see these adaptations, yeah, just want to say like even if you see sectorally like where the finance is flowing, you see like a lot of chunk is going cross sectoral financing. This probably refers to more like nexus solutions and multiple objective projects, etc. But yeah, like things like AFLU, which is sort of probably one of the kind of this is really a missed opportunity. Agriculture really, I think, contributes, I think, 1/3 to Africa's GDP in general, and employs like more than 60% of workforce, and and it accounts for like more than 60% or something of the region's emissions. So this is really a missed opportunity, and you kind of compare it's agriculture, forest, and other land use on the chart. So yeah, so this is what basically I'm trying to say is that climate finance tracking, understanding the needs, where the country stands, really helps you get these sort of information and kind of help in more evidence-based policy making, and building on financing strategies for those countries. And this is just Africa. There are other country case studies out there we have done as part of the Africa study. I think there was Burkina Faso, Nigeria, and Ethiopia. So there are like more detailed studies out there. For them, we are currently taking one study in Ghana and South Africa. We kind of doing a 3-year program with the government there. So yeah, hopefully we get to see more of these infographics. And yeah, I'll stop here. Happy to take any reaction questions. I will open the chat as well and see if there are some good questions. But yeah, yeah, somebody said it's really lagging. There's not a good statistic. Yes, sorry to break that to you. But that's true. Okay, Tilana, yeah, over to you. And yeah.
Okay, thank you very much, Chavi. Thank you so much. We really appreciate it. I mean, I learned a lot from you. I'm sure the participants did. So please, if you have questions, again, understand like you also have a lot of things to get back to, and our facilitators as well. But this section was scheduled for 16:00 UTC to 18:00 UTC. So we're trying to wrap up within this time frame. However, you can use raise hand function if you have a question, or you can ask it in the chat and we'll try to pick the questions from the chat. So
Great. There's
um,
one question on like what when you say public, what are you meaning national, foreign country investments? So public, what categories we are able to track is development financial institutions, whether they're multilateral, bilateral, DFRs. Then there's another category on climate funds, and then so public finance can also be kind of divided into international and domestic finance. So when international would be more donor governments and more developed countries of bilateral financing. And then we also be able to track more on public side domestically, which is more like climate budgets or government budgets. And there's other categories as well. Probably I'm missing state-owned enterprises and other ones that are out there.
okay, thank you. Okay, so Jen has his hand
No, I think
raised.
Romy has a question first. Go ahead, Romy.
Okay, Romy, please go ahead.
My reaction do not work. Thank you so much. This was so interesting, and I agree. Your data visualization was great. I have a question. We are currently preparing for the 7 technical expert dialogue. No, is it already the 8? Technical expert dialogue for the new collective quantified goal, and there's also a topic will be the transparency issue. So I wanted to ask you if you have some political advice, what you think would be necessary for increasing the transparency for the new collective quantified goal.
Sure. Do I need to take more questions, or I can answer Romy questions?
Mine is related to something completely else. So I think if no one else has any question, you can answer that one.
Sure. So political advice, and I think one is for the new, what is going to be relevant for the NCQG, which is the new collective quantified goal, would be kind of better understanding of what countries' need are, right? Like the whole, and this is what we keep reiterating at Climate Policy Initiative, is that it's not about 100 billion. When you compare it with the country's need, you already saw that's like trillions, right? So 100 billion is really a small part of the equation, not the whole equation. But that being said, I think that's really important that trust, it was a trust matter. So that kind of gets reinstalled, when more finance is flowing, they kind of commit to those 100 billion. But more what we can do in the future and, what should be there. I think one is, again, I kind of mentioned, the need assessment. I think that's a critical one, and that's what's going to be feeding into your NCQG goal. UNFCCC anyway has a needs determination report that's going to be coming next year. But I think UNFCCC already anyway provides a lot of guidance on how kind of, provide some top-down estimates on how these needs assessments should be done. But I think there's lack of granular guidance, and that further guidance needs to go through as part of the enhanced transparency framework, that was agreed at COP. So that's a good really opportunity to help countries strengthen their estimation needs in developing countries. I'll come back to the question. I think that's one thing that politically, that's one thing that comes in how UNFCCC can also kind of support that assessment. But yes, 100 billion on NCQG is just a small part of the equation. I think that's an important thing to remember.
Okay, thank you, Chavi. I hope that answered the question, Romy and Jen. Did it? Oh, thank you. I see that. Okay, so Chavi, there's a question in the chat, Ross. I know there's demand to mobilize private sector capital. Have you seen this before, or I should read it? I don't know if you have seen it already.
I'm just looking at it.
Yeah, I will just read it. Should I?
That's fine. So it says demand to mobilize private sector capital and projects to be implemented, deployed. But what are some of the ways to minimize that risk perception, to increase private sector appetite in LDCs and states? Yeah, that's an important question, and that's what we kind of working how to catalyze sort of more private sector engagement and and including domestic capital. If you really see a major chunk, like as you see, like private sector is only like 14%, right? And that's actually, we kind of did the assessment and realized that's actual perceived, it can be like actual risk that that capital providers think. It could be perceived risk. There are ticket size issues that dissuades them from kind of doing the sort of investments. What we really think is the role of DFIs and development partners really comes into place where, we already talking about the IFI reforms, right? How we got a global financial architecture, but more specifically, they really need to target higher leverage ratios through blended financing structures, which can really focus a lot more on private insurances and, partial guarantees. So that could really help support capacity building and, kind of get those domestic finance into the system and help developing those pipelines that, Adrian also talked about. Like, yeah, there's a pipeline of investable opportunities to build those things. And, information exchange platforms like this, but also like, one of the international ones like a global financial alliance, Net Zero, could really support pipeline development and, kind of be able to engage more domestic institutions. So yeah, DFIs really have a role to kind of de-risk investments in particular countries where certain risks and, risks are high. And these risks are actually very varied, for different countries. It could be currency instability risk. It could be governance regulatory problems, ticket size I mentioned. Some countries do have bankable projects, some don't have a project pipeline. They're counterparty risk. So there's all these different sort of risk identification that needs to be done as part of like different sectors. And of course, information asymmetries and all those different aspects out there that kind of leads to such lower and high risk perception and less private finance mobilized in these countries.
Okay, thank you, Chave. So I think Joshua already responded in the chat room and said, thank you, I agree. Maybe merging blended finance and utilizing PPPs. Yeah. So thank you, Joshua. And it seems there's no other question. We're well within the hour.
I am waiting to respond because I meant to make my question now, but it's fine.
Jen. Okay, please go ahead.
Hi, thank you, Chavi, so much for all the info that you have provided us. It was delightful to see the presentation and also to really look at the national level of looking at how can we evaluate the flows of finance and talking about that. I really love the reports that the organization does. And regarding to that, I'm thinking forward on what are we going to expect on report on the report that we're going to see in November, and maybe the ones that are coming after, since and connecting with the other things that we have seen in the sessions is the new standards of the International Sustainable Board. How the International Sustainability Standards Board. How can we? I mean, not how can we, but is it gonna change the landscape on climate finance when we will get more like these like standardized reports on the investments provided to resilience and climate resilient development, low carbon development? Is it going to change how we look at these reports? Are we gonna see like a more global mix between multilateral and national approaches to how we assess the amount of climate finance? Are we going to still see this kind of like everyone measure it at its own pace, because it's voluntarily? It's still voluntary in many countries. So yeah, what are your outlooks thinking on the challenges of defining what is climate finance and what are the outputs of your reports can contribute to that? And maybe I make so many questions, but I'm like
no, thank you so much.
Things that are changing.
And that reminds me, I should have probably put like a slide on like the data gaps that are there. Like it's comprehensive to the extent it's possible, but then of course the data gaps, especially what you raised is like the private sector data set, right? Which kind of, we don't have, like, for instance, private sector investment data, or we have very limited data on certain sectors, say instance for the agriculture, forestry, land use, because as you said, it's voluntary. So with these new frameworks and disclosure coming in place, that's really going to enhance and improve the comprehensiveness of these exercises, right? Like whether you talked about the sustainability accounting standard boards or the TCFD or the task force there's a lot of acronyms, a task force on climate-related financial disclosures and, global reporting initiatives. So all these international taxonomies, it really offers a good point, and it's just going to increase comprehensiveness of the reports that we have, and give us more granular information on subsectors, etc. As if these different private actors kind of start reporting in. So we're really looking forward to how it really manifests and how long it'll take to manifest, right? Like it really took us 10 years to kind of reach the comprehensiveness right now. We kind of each year we kind of keep trying improving the data sets that are available to us, trying to do certain estimations wherever possible. So for instance, we included electric vehicle data from last 2-3 years, working with other organizations and all those things. So yeah, I think data disclosure and transparency and kind of even understanding impact, I think that's really going to be another key aspect, right? How, the improving this transparency reporting and, kind of delivers on the impact outcomes, etc. So those sort of things really become important, and more granular data will be made available for us.
Yeah, and to what extent do you think this will influence, making adaptation and resilience or loss and damage projects more bankable in terms of the disclosures and how we mitigate those risks, and how did that blend into the new system?
Oh, definitely. I think the more transparency, and that's one other thing, right? The private sector, like the whole perceived risk or actual risk are coming from the fact that I also mentioned is one of the key important factors, information asymmetries, right? We don't have data. So yeah, I think that will really help us kind of get those, opportunities and then mobilize these different actors. Like just to give an example of insurance, right? Insurance sector really has a lot of climate finance modeling. They're the actual scientists, and they have all the data set. But are we doing the risk modeling, and they can really deliver and kind of mobilize and kind of coordinate with other stakeholders to can get that sort of information and model risk into their databases and get that sort of climate information analytics that are available to get maybe like provide more localized climate risk and vulnerability data that's really needed for any adaptation estimations and resilience estimations. Loss and damage is like a different thing. We still need to see what counts in it and does that. Like there are a bit overlaps also with adaptation, but yeah, I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah,
Hopefully
this is quite
exciting.
insightful. Like I had some idea, but yeah, it clarifies a lot more. Well, thank you very much, Xavi. And sorry that I cut you, Ilona, but we need to leave the Zoom as another working group has it scheduled for this hour. But yeah, I want to maybe give some closing remarks. Ilona, you there?
Yeah. Sorry, I didn't hear you. I missed that part.
All right. Well,
Okay,
anyway,
so I can't hear what. Yeah, Jen, you said something about closing remarks. Okay, so everyone, thank you so much for joining the section today. I can see a lot of people are already dropping off. Thank you, Adrian. Thank you, Xavi. Again, thumbs up and a lot of claps to everybody that stayed through to this moment. I can see Romy. So we need to quickly take pictures. So Romy, could you help us with that, please? And everyone, please turn on your videos and let's quickly do a picture together. And thank you very much, Xavi, once more for taking us through the whole climate finance landscaping and tracking, especially as it relates to Africa. I know 2 hours is not enough to do justice to the conversations of climate finance and stuff, and I'm sure that's why we would be able to reach out when we want to. So quickly, Jen, Romy, who's going to help us with that?
All right, count to 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Climate justice.
Climate justice.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Okay, thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you,
Take care.
everyone. See you next section. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much.
Bye.